Welcome to today's author event. My name is Emily McAvoy, and I am the Teen Services Coordinator for St. Louis County Library. Our event today is produced in partnership with HEC Media. Our event bookseller is Left Bank Books, St. Louis's premier and oldest independent bookstore. You can order a copy of our featured book at left-bank.com. And we so appreciate you supporting our author and our indie bookstore partner with your book purchase. Our author today is Sophie Burrows. She's an award-winning British writer, illustrator, and comics creator. Inspired by the everyday, she loves to tell stories which explore themes of human behavior, mental health, and relationships. Crushing is her debut graphic novel. Hi, Sophie. Welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Could you tell us a little bit about your new book, Crushing?
So this is Crushing. It's a wordless graphic novel, and it tells the story of two people kind of navigating their solitary lives, living in a big city. It's described as an illustrated misadventure in love and loneliness, but really it's about connection.
What inspired you to tell the story in this way, that it's almost completely wordless?
There's a few answers to that question, I think. So I started the book as a drawing project, and I was just making series of drawings in my sketchbook of crowded places. And I was really interested in like the stories that crowded places can tell, you know, all these people intertwining. And I began to kind of explore different characters within those crowds. And it was the first book that I had attempted for a while, and I was a little bit nervous about writing, to be honest. So drawing was my comfort zone. But as I developed these illustrations, I wanted to see how far I could kind of push the storytelling without words. So I began to kind of see how far it could go. And I felt like the themes that I was pulling out of sort of loneliness and that feeling of being in a city and wandering around all day and not communicating with anybody, it just felt so right to do the book wordless. So that's where it ended up.
One of my favorite panels is the two kind of, I guess I'll say main characters, the two that you kind of focus on throughout the book. They're in, I think, the grocery store at the same time, but they don't ever see each other. And I feel like that's a very common thing that can happen in people's everyday life.
Yeah, it's one of those things, I guess, that makes a city feel smaller than it is, because you can be in a huge city and know lots of people that live there, but never cross paths with them. But then it's like that thing, isn't it, where you can bump into somebody that you know at the airport and it just seems really random and strange. And I kind of liked the idea of exploring that in the drawings. And I was thinking about a lot of I guess tropes in rom-coms too. You know, there's always these scenes where the eyes meet through the bookshelves, or you know, these sort of super romantic things that I think for a long time lots of us want to happen in real life but often don't come true. And I sort of wanted to play with that a little bit, not necessarily ironically, but just to sort of see that in a realistic setting, you know, in the supermarket, where it's the least romantic place you could probably be.
So your publisher is listing Crushing as a young adult book, but really I think this will appeal to readers of all ages. Did you have an intended audience in mind when you were writing the book?
It's interesting because here in the UK, Crushing is out as an adult title. But I hope that it appeals to lots of different ages. And I think when I was writing it, truthfully, I was writing it for me, because like I said before, I hadn't necessarily done anything for a while that had really meant something to me. And so I wanted to tell a story that was personal and that sort of, I guess, spoke from my heart. But I think that the the way that the story is constructed and how I came up with parts of it, it's lots of memories, and lots of the memories are from when I was much younger, and some of the memories are from now. So I think that it's a story that is universal in its emotions, the feelings of loneliness. All of us can feel that way, but I suppose it feels different when you're at different ages. And I hope that there are moments in the book that sort of draw on that.
Yes, I think so. Because as an adult reading it, it didn't feel like a teen book, but I can see teens connecting with it in a really good way, like them seeing their own story in it. Reviews are calling Crushing a modern love story. The New York Journal of Books described it as a perfectly pitched for the current time of pandemic isolation. Why do you think Crushing is resonating so strongly with the current moment?
I think possibly because most of it was made during the height of the pandemic. And the original story started in 2016. I had made a short comic. I've got it here. It's actually, this was the first kind of incarnation, and it was a love story, really. But as I began thinking about making it into a longer book, I was thinking about connection in all its forms. And I suppose as the opposite to loneliness is connection, and thinking about all the different types of connection, not just romantic connection, but friendship and community. And I was thinking about all these things, and then the pandemic hit and we were sort of thrust into this lockdown, and so much of what was happening just became I guess I absorbed it, and it went into the book. The characters, especially the male character in the book, is he's quite an anxious character, and I think a lot of my anxieties about the pandemic and feelings went into his character and sort of went through his character. And I think that having heard people's responses to the book and messages that I've gotten, I think that though I was not alone in feeling those. So it's very nice for me to have people read the book and say, well, this is exactly how I'm feeling. And I think that lots of us have felt really disconnected in the pandemic, even though we are sort of brought together through technology. It's a different type of connection, and it can leave many people feeling more isolated. So I suppose, unfortunately, that's why maybe it's so fitting for now. But I hope that the message of hope can also be applied to current circumstances too.
Of course. So it is a graphic novel, and like we've said, it's almost completely wordless. How did you decide on the color palette? How did you decide on choosing what would be kind of the aesthetic for the book?
I experimented with a few different ways of working. The color palette came very early on, before I did the sort of original comic that I made. It sort of was the first thing that formed with the very, very early sketches, the color palette, because I was thinking about those sort of rom-com feelings, and I was thinking about love, and it made me think of red. I wanted to explore color symbolism because I feel like red is so powerful. You know, it can mean love, it can mean passion, but it also means embarrassment, and it brings up all these feelings. And it's a very emotion-driven book, I think. So I wanted to use red to help guide me through the writing process as well. And so that was kind of integral to the story from the beginning. And then I began to use it as a tool to explain the strength of emotions that the characters were feeling, because lots of the images are told through their perspective. And then I was using these blues as well, almost as a background, but I began to explore how powerful blue can be as well, because of course that evokes many other feelings. And the two of them together, or the three of them, there were three pencils that I used, just seemed to really work for me in communicating those things. But I was terrified that those pencils were going to go out of stock. So I bought a big box of them because they go down very quickly. I used very many of them in making the book.
How many do you think that you used?
Oh gosh. I mean, I haven't counted the little stubs because I couldn't go all the way. It's going to be close to 45, I would imagine, which is quite a lot.
Yeah, I would think. Writing, I say writing because you wrote this book with your pictures. What was the most challenging part?
That's a really good question. I think for me, I had never written anything this long before. I'm from a children's illustration background, so I've been making picture books before this. So one of the biggest hurdles for me, I suppose, was to understand how to create something that long and get all the pieces in order, I suppose, because the way that the book was constructed was almost a series of moments. So I was thinking about memories and moments and things that I felt like these wanted to happen to these characters, or they would come from drawings. And I found it very difficult to, I suppose, put all those drawings in order, and the editing process was quite tricky as well, because I just had done these doodles that probably didn't mean anything to anybody apart from me. But I think that was it. But once I got into the flow of it, me and my editor were able to sort of weave this tale that just came together effectively. But it was really tricky. It took longer than I expected it to.
On the other side of that, did you have something that was really easy while you were writing it, illustrating it, that you were like, oh, of course, this is exactly how it needs to go?
And there were moments, like you described, of sort of pure inspiration, where I was like, oh yes, this happens, and then this happens. I'd have a very creative day. There wasn't anything particularly drawing wise where it all just clicked. Perhaps the page where it's raining, there's this big scene where the rain's all coming down, and I was terrified about doing that page because I thought, oh, I've never drawn anything like this before. It's going to be really difficult. But it rains all the time here. So it's obviously stored up there, because that sort of just came together when I was drawing it, and I thought, oh, this is what rain looks like, and it works, and that's perfect. But yeah, so probably that was something I was scared about, and then it came quite easily.
In your style of drawing, have you been influenced by any illustrators or even writers from when you were younger or now? And how did you find your style?
Oh, I'm still not sure that I have. I feel like I'm always looking for something further in terms of a style. I guess the way that I developed how I work now largely came from my master's course that I did. So I graduated in 2019 from Cambridge School of Art, and I had sort of gone back to refresh my practice. And we do this amazing thing where you have to draw from observation for a whole term. That's all you do. You're not making stories, you're just drawing what you see and what's around you. And that, for me, even though I found it very difficult, was sort of how I came to find my style, I suppose, was just from almost automatic drawing, I suppose, of what I saw, and excellent tutor feedback, I think. But in terms of inspirations, I have so many. I think, especially in the past few years, people who have people who've always inspired me, probably Raymond Briggs. He's brilliant. I absolutely love Isabel Arsenault's work, who's another graphic novelist. apart from that, it changes all the time. I think I have plenty of children's book illustrators that I find really inspiring. But also I think it probably comes across in the book that I am really inspired by films and movies as well, the way that scenes are set and things like that.
There's the panel where we see each of our female main character and male main character, and they're in their apartments, and you do the panels of what they're watching, like on Netflix. It felt very like, oh, of course, everyone has seen those movies, the romance, the kind of violent action movie. So it felt very like, of course, that's everyone's kind of Netflix cue. So
yeah, I feel like sometimes they're just speaking to you as well. It's almost like the stars are aligning in that moment. I really wanted it just to be a bit of an eye roll and be like, oh, come on, like, cut me a break, Netflix.
This isn't what I need right now, but okay. On your website, and like I stated before, your bio says that you're inspired by the everyday. Can I ask what inspired your short comic, Duck? I first saw it on Instagram, which I think makes it even better reading it, because you kind of have to scroll through each small panel. So if you kind of want to describe that comic and then tell what the inspiration was for it.
Yeah, so Duck is a 6-panel comic, and you see a lady and her little boy feeding the ducks. The lady is far too absorbed with her phone and ends up being distracted while the little boy gets eaten by a giant duck. That comic was inspired by, I guess, the everyday in terms of people feeding ducks. It actually came from the very first page of Crushing. There is a lady and her little boy feeding the ducks, and it came from that drawing. I thought, I'm going to do something with the characters inside Crushing that aren't sort of explored. I guess the idea for it was sort of me exploring a slightly surreal side to illustrations where you have something every day that happens and then something completely bizarre. It was part of an Instagram challenge I was doing to try and break free from kind of getting stuck with storytelling. And it was word prompts. So the prompt was duck, and I was under a time limit of a day. And I think that your brain does strange things when you only give it a very short amount of time to come up with a story. I was in a rut and I was just having these really weird ideas.
So I didn't anticipate it when you're scrolling through it, because the giant duck has a small duck like tied to his head. It was just delightful to get to that panel. It's not for the little boy, but it was just delightful little comic to read. So thank you.
Thank you.
And we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I always ask authors, are you a plotter or a pantser? So even for Crushing, with it being completely visual, did you know that you wanted to include certain things, or was just like you drew something and then that led to something else? Or was it like, no, I want to include this kind of moment and this kind of moment already planned out?
Probably a bit of both. So there were moments that came from little drawings that I'd done in my sketchbook, and if I do a drawing and it makes me chuckle when I do it, I'm always like, right, that has to go in something somewhere. There's a part right after the protagonists meet for the first time where we see an echo of what we've just seen her go through. So the moment we were talking about with the Netflix, we go back to his place and we see the same thing repeated. And I had sort of planned that there would be echoes and repetitions and mirroring throughout the book to show how the characters are similar, but also show how they're different. So those were definitely planned moments. And then there were other things, like there's a kid mooning on the bus. I don't know, is mooning a British thing? He's flashing his bottom. Oh no, you do that too. Okay. I didn't know if you might have had I thought you might have had a really like good word for it that wasn't mooning.
No.
But so he's mooning on the bus, and that just came. I was drawing bus things, and I thought, well, people moon on the bus, children, kids, teenagers. So I put that in there, and that was like an instinctive thing. And when in doubt, draw a bum.
Can you tell us anything about what you have coming up? Is there anything a lot of times authors can't tell us, but any projects that you have upcoming?
I am working on a book for children, 8 to 10-year-olds. I'm not sure how much more I can say about it, other than it is in comic format as well. So that's really exciting because I get to flex my comic muscles again. And so that's what I'm working on at the moment. I'd love to do more graphic novel work, but I haven't got any seeds of inspiration yet for the second longer graphic novel.
I know that was a kind of my last question for you, is if you would like to revisit this format, the kind of wordless graphic novel, and to have another story be told.
Definitely. I mean, I'd love to do another graphic novel. I feel like this one being wordless felt so fitting for what the book was about, and the themes. I don't know if I think if I did another wordless graphic novel, it would have to also be right for the story to do it wordless, I think. But for sure, I'd love to make another graphic novel. But what about? I don't know. Do you have any ideas?
I don't know, but hopefully you find something, because I would love to read and see more of your work in this format. So thank you, Sophie, so much for joining us today, and to HEC Media and to Left Bank Books. And thank you all for watching.
Thank you so much.